Brendan, we are back with another fantastic TFL Classics podcast and another breakfast rant.
Yes, I think I may have come up with something quite revolutionary as far as breakfast eating goes. So the main thing that a lot of people eat for breakfast is eggs.
Sure.
Right? What is an egg style of cooking that normally isn't associated with breakfast?
An omelet? Wait, an egg
No, that
style?
normally isn't associated with breakfast.
That involves eggs?
Yes.
A deviled egg.
Exactly. I made some breakfast deviled eggs. I substituted the mayonnaise for cream cheese, and I substituted the mustard for everything seasoning that you would normally see on a bagel, and I had it this morning for breakfast, and it was delicious.
Cream cheese instead of mayonnaise.
Yes.
Now, I feel like the texture would be off there. Because what makes the deviled egg so good is that creaminess. Was it a chunky deviled egg?
It wasn't. No, I had to put the cream cheese in the microwave a little bit to soften it.
No.
Just like you soften butter, right? Not completely liquid, but just a little bit softened, and then blended it all together, and it was quite delicious, and it made a very convenient breakfast.
It does sound good. Did you put like little bits of bacon on top? Like little...
No, but I'm going to have to do that now that you said it.
Bacon
Maybe
chunks?
on my next round of breakfast deviled eggs.
Now, why can't you just have normal deviled eggs for breakfast?
Because that's weird. You got mayonnaise and mustard in there. That's a lunch thing.
Well, I would argue that mayonnaise is an all-day condiment.
I don't know that I would agree with that.
You know what I do? And
What's
I
that?
recently discovered this is very weird. But occasionally when I've had a really bad day and I'm feeling really sad, I'll just go to the fridge, grab the thing of mayonnaise, take a teaspoon, and just whoop.
Oh my God, that's nasty.
Just a little taster of mayonnaise to brighten my day. You ever do that?
No, well, once by accident. I put mayonnaise on my sandwich, and then I was like, oh, I should clean this off, and I did that. Never again.
I love mayonnaise. There's no food in this world better than mayonnaise. So
man.
people do that with peanut butter, right? They'll just like quick teaspoon of peanut butter.
Sure.
Why not a teaspoon of mayonnaise?
Because that's gross.
It's not gross. It was, I'll have you know, quite delicious.
I guess to each his own. And I don't know, maybe let us know in the comments below. Do you spoon feed yourself mayonnaise?
Not
in the morning?
spoon feed. Let me clarify, not a tablespoon. That's too much. Not multiple teaspoons. Just one little teaspoon when you're having a really bad day that'll turn that day right around.
Or make it worse.
Depends whether or not you are a true aficionado of the mayonnaise.
I guess so. Well, should we spare them our mayonnaise and egg talk and get onto this list that they all clicked into?
Yeah, and you put it together this week, Brendan, and what are we talking about?
So we were talking about some semi-classic. I mean, we're talking cars that are probably in the realm of 15 to 20 years old from the early 2000s that you can go out and purchase for around 15 grand or maybe even less, and would give you a fantastic driving experience, look great going down the road, and may even increase in value over the years.
So, for those of you thinking we're crazy for talking about cars from the early 2000s in the realm of classic, it's a fact of the matter, we're in 2023. The year 2000 was 23 years ago. You know, we're getting into that classic territory. Not every classic has to be from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. There's a lot of modern classics out there, a lot of modern collectibles, which are very, very cheap right now, offer a fun driving experience, which is different than anything on the road today, for a lot less money. And that is what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. And of course, in normal fashion, we've got 10 of them here for you, and we are going to start off at number 10, which is the Saturn Sky / Pontiac Solstice GXP, or the Saturn Sky Redline, rather.
Now, this car came out at the exact wrong time in U.S. history because this really hit the market at the same time the financial crisis was going full swing. People were out of a job, they were out of money, and then General Motors is, here, have our two-door convertible Roadster or coupe.
Yeah, it wasn't a great time. I mean, what's interesting is GM actually released a lot of really cool stuff around the worst time that they possibly could. And it kind of all died because of the timing, really. I think if this Saturn Sky had been released a little bit later or a little bit earlier, it might still be around today.
Do you know who Bob Lutz is?
I do.
He was the famous chairman of GM for many years. He's a hugely influential person in the automotive world, has established many, many great models throughout the years. This was his baby. His whole philosophy with his car was to make a GM Miata. I just saw an interview with him actually pretty recently on this car. But let's talk a little bit about the facts in this car. So the Sky came out in 07. The Solstice, the Pontiac came out a little earlier.
Yep, came out in 2006, and they made these all the way through 2010. And for our viewers over in Europe, you will know this as the Opel GT.
Yeah. Now, there were base models that you could get with the standard 2.4-liter, 177 horsepower engine. But if you wanted something a little bit more spicy, you could get the Red Line, which had a 2-liter, 4-cylinder turbo, 260 American horsepower with a limited slip differential.
Yeah, and this thing even came with some stiffer suspension and a 6-speed manual transmission. So this thing was really, a 5-speed manual transmission. So this thing was actually a really good performer down the road, and I think they did a great job with it, honestly. I love the way these things look.
Now, question. They were sister cars, right? The Pontiac Solstice and the Saturn Sky. Which of the two do you find to be the more attractive design?
I like the Sky simply because of the front end. I think it has a little bit sleeker design. The Pontiac's a little more bubbly, although I will say that Pontiac Solstice Coupe, which is super, super rare and you definitely couldn't get for less than $15,000, the back end of that thing is quite possibly one of the best looking back ends that GM's ever made, in my opinion.
Are they really that expensive?
Yeah, they're
Really?
pretty. I mean, they only came out for like the last year or so of them, and so they only made about 1,200 of the coupes. So they are very, very rare.
Wow. I don't know if I've ever seen. I thought this was maybe like a dealer thing that someone cobbled together, but that's a pretty cool design. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, it was. Towards the tail end, they had the idea of, hey, let's turn this convertible into a little hatchback, and it looked strikingly beautiful, but they came out with it just a little bit too late, and the death knell was already going on.
Now, when you're talking about performance, the Red Line, which was the performance version of the Saturn, and the GXP, which was the performance version of the Pontiac, 0 to 60 in as little as 5.2 seconds, quarter mile in 14 seconds, and they were assembled in Wilmington, Delaware?
Yeah.
I had no
I thought
clue.
that was interesting. I didn't know we ever had any cars that were built in Delaware. The small little state out there on the East Coast, this is actually where they were built. The other interesting thing I saw, too, was that there was a dealer-installed option where they upgraded the turbo and gave it an additional 30 horsepower. So if there are some of those out there that have 290 horsepower in this light little convertible car.
Just know this was almost my first car.
Really?
Yeah, the Saturn Sky. Yeah, because in 2007, my dad went with my neighbor to go buy a new convertible. He decided he wanted one. They just went out one night to go buy a Saturn Sky. They roll into the Saturn dealer, and Saturn had this great thing where it was like the price is the price. There's no like markups and no negotiating. He rolled into the Saturn dealer, and the Saturn dealer said, "Yep, Saturn Sky is selling for $5,000 over sticker." He turned right around, drove to Champ Mini, bought a mini convertible, and then like 5 years later, my dad bought it from him as a used car, and that was my first car.
Wow.
So all you folks who complain about my mini reviews being too overly positive, it could have been the same thing with the Saturn Sky.
Just if the dealer didn't have that markup.
Pretty crazy, right?
That is pretty crazy. It's interesting that while they were struggling, the dealers were marking them up like that. I think maybe if the dealers hadn't been marking them up, they might have sold even better.
Yeah, and the other issue with them too is the interiors are pretty dreadful. So first of all, they were a little too big and a little too heavy compared to the Miata. And then the interiors were very, very poor in terms of their build quality. But still, pretty reliable car, pretty good-looking car, I think. And you're not, going to be driving the same old Miatas as your neighbor. So that's kind of a fun choice.
What was that? What's that weird three-wheeled vehicle made by, isn't it Polaris Slingshot?
Sure.
Didn't it use the same engine that was in these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that 2.4.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's the Ecotech is what it's called. They use them in everything. And they're pretty bulletproof. I had a friend that used one in a race car, like a Baja race car. All right, next up on the list, Brendan, a design icon. The Audi TT, the first generation, sold from 98 through 2006.
Yeah, do you know why it was named the TT?
I don't actually.
So it was named after the Isle of Man, or Isle of Man, TT race.
Sorry, the Isle of Man.
Is that, isn't it? Like Le Mans? I don't know.
Something completely different.
I'm way off my rocker.
Le
Apparently.
Mans, the Isle of Mans.
Sorry, I'll go back to being American. The Isle of Man.
There you go.
Yeah, the Isle of Man TT race. That's what they actually named it after, and I think that's pretty cool. And this was available as both a coupe and a roadster, and it was based on the same platform that you'd see as the Golf or the Audi A3, but I think this looks way better. And I know when these first came out, I had a neighbor that had one. Every time I saw that thing driving down the street, I thought it was such a striking car that it looked so different from everything else out on the road back then in the early 90s. I'm sorry, in the late 90s, that it's just, to this day, I still love them every time I see it going down the road.
So Audi utilized a design language called Bauhaus, which was this art movement in Germany in the early 20th century. Very modern, very progressive. And then Audi brought those same design elements to actually a car when they developed the Audi TT. And it really was super ahead of its time in design. We're talking a car that's now 25 years old, still looks modern, still looks very aerodynamic. Now, the downfall in terms of the handling and the performance is that it is based on the Golf. Right. And the all-wheel drive system, which was optional, was a Halidex all-wheel drive system. There were a couple of different engines. There was 4 cylinders, V6 options. What are some of the power numbers?
Yeah, so that 1.8 liter 4-cylinder either had 180 horsepower or 225 horsepower. And the main differences are it had a bigger turbo, an additional intercooler, dual exhaust, and more aggressive intake manifold to get that 225 horsepower. And the thing that's also interesting is if you got the 225 horsepower 4-cylinder, they came standard with the Quattro or the Halidex type all-wheel drive system.
Yep. There was also the option of a 3.2 VR6, which came around in 2003. And we got to talk about the best part of the TT. In case you're not in the know, it's kind of a tricky option to find now, but it's the baseball glove stitched interior.
That is one of the main reasons that I want one of these, because it is such a unique design. And if you're listening to this on podcast, let me describe it for you. So it's like this baseball glove brown colored interior that includes the seats and the steering wheel. And then along the edges of it, they gave it this yellow thick stitching that literally does replicate the stitching you would see on a baseball glove.
Yeah, and it's one of the coolest interiors ever installed to a car. Super unique. Kind of hard to find. Not every TT. Very few TTs had them because it was a rare option. Did you know we owned one of these?
Really?
Yeah, before you came along, we had a the kind of the color you wanted, which was this battleship gray with the baseball glove interior.
Oh man, I wish I would have seen that.
Yeah, it was $6,000. Yeah, and it was in really good shape. Now, the other thing about these cars is that every component on the inside that looks like metal is metal. So the bezels around the air vents, the little cover over the radio, the bezel around the shifter, everything you touch that looks like aluminum is aluminum. And I was actually recently talking to one of the PR folks at Audi. And it's funny because the PR folks at Audi and the product folks, right, they can own a lot of cars in this world. Sure. They can own, they're all Audi fans, but like 3 of them own baseball glove TTs.
Really?
And I asked why, and one of the folks told me in the know, he said if Audi were to build that car today with the amount of exposed aluminum and the quality of materials they put on the interior, it'd be $120,000 starting.
Jeez.
Because this was the era of Ferdinand Piëch, who was no compromise at any expense, do it the best way possible. So these cars are really nice on the inside. Now the downfall is they don't drive very well, they're not particularly reliable, and they don't handle very well. So
that's a bummer.
It's really nice to look at, fantastic to cruise around in, but the Halidex is a little kind of dumb.
Yeah,
it's very front-wheel drive biased.
Yeah, because basically, so Audi's typical all-wheel drive system, correct me if I'm wrong here, is like a full-time all-wheel drive system that reacts. It's primarily rear wheel, and then it reacts to slippage to
It depends, but a lot of times.
Wheels. Whereas the Halidex, isn't it just front-wheel drive, and then occasionally it'll send some power to the rear wheels?
Yeah, I mean, the Audi, like the Quattro systems that people want to remember are like the full-time systems. The Halidex system is what they called like a slip then grip. So front wheels would slip and then it would send power. So it's a little clunky. The new Halidex system's much better. But yeah, I mean, great cars to look at, great cars to sit in.
Yeah.
Not great to drive, and then they get pretty rattly over about 100,000 miles. I just sat next to a guy in a plane that has 3 of them. That's how much he loves them.
Jeez, wow.
And then here's a fun fact about these. So the most expensive TTs are the first model year without the spoiler.
Oh, really?
Do you remember the whole spoiler thing on these
Yeah.
cars? So what they found is that this design, as beautiful as it was, high speed on the Autobahn, at high speeds over 100 miles an hour, the rear end would get super light and lift off the ground and crash. I mean, people were getting seriously injured in these cars at high speeds.
Yikes.
So the solution was to put a little tiny lip spoiler on the coupes. And it was like a recall. You bring your car in, they drill the holes. But if you can get a early TT without the lip spoiler, that's the one that's going to be the most valuable.
Interesting.
Yeah, non-recalled car, apparently.
Okay.
So next up, Brendan, bit of a Nissan car here.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about this car so much, and we've never driven one.
The 350Z.
Every time we're at the auction, remember that was a black one.
That's true,
You wanted
yeah.
to drive it. Why the 350Z? What's the appeal there?
So the 350Z came out in 2003, sold through 2008, and I think, honestly, of the more modern Zs, this is probably my favorite. This had the 3.5-liter VQ V6 pumping out either 287 to 306 horsepower, depending on what year you got. And you could get this thing with a 6-speed manual. And honestly, I think, especially in drop-top form, these things are very beautiful, especially from the back end, and I think they sound great. I know a lot of people don't love the way these VQ engines sound, but I do, and I think they sound better than even the newest Z.
That's a terrible opinion, Brendan. You're welcome to have it, but that's a horrible opinion. A VQ engine, especially with a bad exhaust on it, sounds like a trombone in middle school.
Well, yeah, you don't want
As a-
one with modified exhaust. I like just the way the factory exhaust on these 350Zs sound. I think it's subtle, yet still a little bit throaty, and I think they do sound really good.
Much like my vacuum cleaner. Very similar. You really like the way they sound?
I do.
The issue
I
is
do.
that they've been the VQ series of engine has been ruined by kids in G35 Infinities at takeover meets, just bouncing the thing off the rev limiter and waking up every poor soul in the mile radius. Look, I like these cars. I think they're cool. I think the design is good. Other hot take is that you like the convertible more than the coupe, huh?
I know, it's pretty rare. I generally prefer the coupe, but I think if you're looking on YouTube here, the back end of that, they have these like 2 little humps that go behind the rear seats, and it looks really cool. I think it's a really clean design that I think has aged well as well.
The Nismo is especially cool. Really aggressive, especially for back in the day. Big wing out the back. Yeah, these cars are very cool. I do agree. I like the interiors too. They had these like 3 gauge pods up on the dash, which was neat. Definitely find a manual transmission. They're getting kind of hard to find in unmodified form though.
Yeah, they were so cheap for so long that the kind of people bought them, you wouldn't want to buy them, and modified them, and they sound terrible and have been thrashed to the ends of their lives. And yeah, but if you could find a really clean version that hasn't been molested, that's the one to get.
I just saw the next car on the list actually.
Yeah.
In person. Got to do some walking around it. We're talking about the new Edge Mustang, number 7 on the list of affordable classics from the early 2000s, the refreshed version of the SN95 Mustang.
Yeah, you guys had the non-refreshed version of the SN95 Mustang.
You still do.
Yeah, and I still have one. My wife has a 6-cylinder with automatic convertible and 200,000 miles, like the most desirable one.
Performance machine right
yes.
there.
I think it does 0 to 60 in like 20-ish seconds or something like that. But
Your calendar.
yeah.
But the refreshed one, so they took the basic SN95 blobby design, squared it off, right? They
Yep.
gave it more aggressive headlights. They gave it new wheels. They gave it slightly more aggressive rear end. And then they called it the New Edge is basically what folks, I don't know if that was officially Ford or if people just named it the New Edge, but 99 through 04. And what are some of the engine options?
Yeah, so you could get this with a 3.8-liter V6 pumping out about 190 horsepower, which for a Mustang isn't much, but when you're thinking about a performance car in general, 190 horsepower, nothing to sneeze at, really. If you got the GT, you stepped it up to a 4.6-liter V8 with 260 horsepower, up from the 225 in the non-refreshed version. So it was pretty potent. And then they even had Cobra versions as well. So the 99 to 01 Cobras put out 320 horsepower is what they said.
Okay.
But a lot of people found when they dynoed them later that they had much less horsepower, and it was kind of a egg on the face moment for Ford. So they came out with a Terminator to help with that in 2003 and 2004, and that has cult status now. We're talking 390 horsepower, supercharged V8, but those were generally underrated, and most people say those are putting out well over 400 horsepower.
Wow, pretty good. Yeah. Now, so the standard GTs, which is going to be a lot of the models you find, right? 4.6 V8, not a hugely powerful engine, and they're kind of tricky to make power with compared to the older 5 liters of like the Fox bodies, but quite reliable, very long-lived, and a lot of fun with the manual transmission. Now, some of the rare editions are starting to get expensive, like the Bullet.
Yes.
Right? So the Bullet was a model that was a little bit lower. It had some chassis bracing. It had the brakes from a Cobra. And then I think it could be had in either Highland Green or the black, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
I had a friend that had one of these. Unique wheels on these. It was, of course, an homage to the original Bullet Mustang from the movie. And very cool car.
Yeah, and I think that is a really good looking one. They also like deleted the rear wing on those, and they gave it like a really neat interior to make it look like the original the original Bullet Mustang. And even the exhaust, they did it to try and mimic the sound of the original. So they did the exhaust just a little bit different. And these got a tiny little power bump up to 265. But my favorite of these Mustangs is the next one on your list, and that is the Saleen S281 SC. They came out with these in 1999, and this is before the Terminator Cobra. They put a supercharger on that V8 pumping out 350 horsepower, and I think gave it one of the best looking designs that the new Edge Mustang has ever had.
You like it, huh?
I do.
Really?
I like it a lot.
I don't know if I like the roll hoop on the convertible. It looks like a good little handle where you could pick it up in the supermarket and move it around.
It gives you extra structural rigidity, so when you're going around corners, it's not so wallowy.
You like the look of that, huh?
I do. Yeah, it's a pretty aggressive ground effects kit. And, if you get it in convertible version, you get that little extra hoop in the back, and you get some cool Saleen graphics on the side and a lot of power, and they're just a hoot to drive.
It's very Tokyo Drift, I'll give you that much.
Sure.
No, the one to get is the Mach 1.
Yeah.
I love these. Yeah, so same 4.6 as the Cobras. The 99, like the early Cobras, featured a retro-themed exterior with an aluminum shift knob and a functional shaker hood scoop. And I think it had independent rear suspension. One of these models in this new Edge had IRS. I don't remember which one.
I think you might be right. I think it might be that Mach 1.
Someone will tell me in the comments section. And then the most extreme, this is the car I just saw last week, the Cobra R. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. Didn't they only make like so many of those, and weren't they all red?
Yeah.
With these giant rear wings on the back?
Yep, it was like the stripped down race car, no back seats, bucket seats, right? It had the side pipes, if you recall. Maybe they were orange. I think they were red or orange, but they were really, really unusual, very valuable now. But I just saw that car at Amelia Island.
Wow.
In Florida.
Speaking of Amelia Island, I watched your Amelia Island video that was on TFL Talk, and you gave me a shout out, so thanks.
What did I give you a shout out for?
You gave me a shout out when you saw a first gen Ford Explorer.
Oh, that's right. I did. I saw the best first gen Ford Explorer. So Amelia Island is one of the nation's leading concours. It's a place for people to show off some of the most highly prized vehicles throughout history, pre-war, post-war, and everything in between. And I was there with Volkswagen. I got to drive a 67 Volkswagen bus, which is now a car on my bucket list. Yeah. Loved it. Didn't like it before.
Oh, you got expensive taste, Tommy.
Loved it. I know. They got really expensive. And then also drove the new electric ID Buzz, which was really cool because Volkswagen actually had a transporter/bus class there. So it was pretty funny. You'd have like these multi-million dollar like 1950s and 60s Ferraris race car, and then a line of Volkswagen buses. And I just loved it. But it was an interesting weekend because I've never been around so many cars of such value at the same time. Like you'll be walking down the street. I got kind of lost and ended up walking like a mile and a half down this road to get somewhere. It was a mess. But along that route, you'd see like a Pagani. And then you'd see like a Koenigsegg. And it was just like people were just driving around.
Oh, man.
which was pretty nuts.
There is one car that I saw in your video, but you didn't talk about it. And
What was
I
that?
was a little bummed. It was a 80s Toyota Celica All-Track. It was red. And I saw it like off in the distance in your video, and you're like, oh, and look at that Buick Rieta. And then you pan to the left and it's gone. And I'm just like, no, Toyota Celica All-Track, talk about it. But
So what was going on? So there was a concours on Sunday where you could go look at like the super bajillion-dollar Ferraris. They had a 959 class where they had 6 of them. And then the day before, they had like a huge Cars and Coffee, which is where I saw the Mustang R.
Okay.
And they also had 2 events going on. Radwood, which is a celebration of 80s and 90s cars. And then Concours de Lemons, which is Concours de Lemons. And that was like just cars.
Nothing like Isle of Mont.
No, not like Isle of Mont. There was a Chevy HHR and a burned down Dodge Dart. And like,
Oh, boy.
it was pretty funny. Now, Radwood has gotten a lot of attention recently, and I was really excited to see it. That one was a little disappointing in person.
Really?
Like, I thought there'd be like more people all dressed up. There's some people dressed up, but everyone dressed up and blasting 80s music and having cool activities. But it was mostly just cars in a field. But I didn't talk about the All-Track. 80s Toyotas are kind of a blind spot in my knowledge.
Yeah.
The Riata, though. Did you see the Riata?
There were a couple of them.
Did you see that Ford Explorer?
Yes, it looked beautiful.
The 92 Explorer? It was beautiful.
1 year newer than mine.
Yeah, he had the full cooler setup in the back, the 90s cooler with all the brochures.
Very, very rad for sure.
It's funny, we're like missing the 30s Alfa Romeos and Maseratis.
Yeah, no.
But the 92 Ford Explorer
All day, give me that one. Yes,
captures our
please.
imagination. It was a great trip, though. I mean, there's a lot of cars there, which I don't know much about, which I had the opportunity to learn about. I talked to a nice guy, fan of the channel, by the way. He had a 1949 Volkswagen, fully restored.
A Beetle, I assume?
Super
or-
old bug, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Super old Volkswagen, which was really cool.
Well, I guess that's so old that they can literally just call it's the Volkswagen they made in 1949.
Yeah, it was the Volkswagen.
Yeah.
It was the Type 1
The
Volkswagen.
one and only.
But yeah, definitely if you have an opportunity, it's pretty expensive to get into. So
Is it?
Yeah, it is pretty expensive. And then the other thing I struggled with a little bit is like I kind of felt like it was like a competition for rich folks to see who could outrich the other rich folks.
Oh, geez.
So like it was like a lot of flash, right? Like you had to show up and then if like you'd see someone, they'd show up in like an air-cooled 911, you'd be like, ooh, nice air-cooled. And then immediately behind them was like an air-cooled 911 turbo, and you'd be like, whoa, that's a cool car. And then it'd be like air-cooled 911 turbo flat nose, and you'd be like, whoa, a flat nose. And then someone would show up in a 959, you'd be like, whoa, this is the top. And then there'd be like Porsche 917 race car. Like it's like you could never be like at the high end of the hierarchy.
You could spend your whole life trying to one up other people on
I
these
know.
cars,
So
but-
it almost felt like some of these folks were using these cars as commodities rather than a passion. But the Volkswagen stand was cool. I loved it. Talked to a guy. He was actually from the Volkswagen Heritage Collection in Germany. He brought over a half-track Volkswagen van, which was just the
nice.
coolest thing.
That is
Yeah,
cool.
they brought it in just for the event. It was really cool. And super knowledgeable guy. I sat next to a comedian, actually.
Which one?
Gabriel Iglesias.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I had dinner with
Well,
him.
of course he would have to be there
I
because
know,
he
he
has. Look at Tommy name dropping over here.
He was
But yeah,
he was
he's
judging.
he's a big aficionado of those buses. So
Yeah,
that makes sense.
after we were done eating, I made sure to sat next to him because I'm a big fan. I love watching his stuff. His name is Fluffy.
Yep.
Really funny comedian. Yeah, and that guy and his restorer, they know more about Volkswagens than I'll ever know in a million years.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
they were talking about like the differences from 1950 to 1951 tail lights and like,
Oh my gosh.
all these little intricacies in fabric. And I was like, I just want my Volkswagen
That's
to
too
run.
much.
Yeah.
That's too much. Well, guys, I think it's time where we take a little bit of an ad break. But right after this ad break, if you stick around, we will get right back to the list. Okay. Are you back? Are you here still with us? If so, thanks. We're going to get right back onto the list.
Thanks.
So moving on to number 6, and I chose the Mercedes SLK 350, which is the second generation of the SLK. And some of you at home may be going, well, that's nothing special. What's interesting about that? Did you know that this was the last ever car that Mercedes, I think this is the last ever car that Mercedes made with a manual transmission. Maybe the last ever convertible. I might be mixing that up.
I would go with that.
Yeah, last ever convertible that Mercedes made with a manual transmission if you got the SLK 350.
Wow. It's not much of a looker.
Well, I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and they styled that front end off of the what was that? The SLR McLaren.
I do see
back
that.
then.
Yes, with the little point there. It's not a bad looking car, and clearly these two people from the press pictures are really liking it.
They're sure enjoying their time in the SLK.
They are both smiling.
Yeah.
Now, why not the first generation SLK?
I think they're fine, but I think they're kind of blobby and
I agree.
kind of plain Jane looking. I'm sure they're great to drive. I've never actually driven one, but I have driven one of these.
Oh, yeah?
And they are pretty fun to drive. I haven't been able to drive one with a manual, but I would love to at some point. But yeah, if you got the 350 on these, it had a 268 horsepower, 6-cylinder engine, doing 0 to 60 in like 5.5 seconds.
Wow.
They're pretty quick.
And it's a pretty comfortable car.
Yeah.
Now, this is from the era, especially the first generation SLK, where Mercedes was under-engineering their cars a little bit.
Yeah.
So they don't have a fantastic reputation for reliability. But if you can find out the manual transmission, I agree with you. It would be a fun car to drive around in. Hardtop convertible, too.
Right.
So if you live in a city, you want some more security, it is an option. Now, reliability-wise, you're probably going to want to find the lowest mileage one you can get.
Sure.
But even still, if it's well-maintained, it should be okay. And yeah, this is a pretty cool choice, especially with the manual. The reason I bring up the first gen is because the first gen had this little 4-cylinder supercharged engine.
Oh, yeah.
Which I always thought was pretty cool.
That is interesting.
This is just the NAV6, but not a bad option, especially with that stick.
But you know what my favorite feature on these is? I'm pretty sure they either debuted it on this or I think probably the SL of the same generation, the air scarf.
Yeah.
So they put the air vents below the headrests so you can drive with the top down and warm air blowing on your back neck or on the back of your neck. So that way it helps keep you a little bit warm in colder weather.
It's like someone breathing on you.
Is that what it
The
feels
back,
like?
it's like just a little refresher on the back of your neck. It's pretty cool though. And there's a little button you push and it just wafts hot air on your back of your neck. Yeah, it was a good idea.
I just think that's a really great idea, especially for a convertible, because I can tell you there's a lot of times as a convertible owner that you're driving around and it's just a little bit too chilly to be driving around with the top down. But if you had that air scarf, I think it would really make it a lot better.
Now, which one did you drive? Was it a 350?
Yeah, it was a SLK 350, but it was an auto.
Mm-hmm. But fun though? Pretty good?
Yeah, I thought it was pretty peppy. I thought it was pretty fun. It felt pretty tight. The nice thing with having that hard top is it makes it a lot more quiet as well. So when you have the top up versus a soft top, it's kind of just like owning a coupe, you know?
Now, I pitched to you an alternative to the SLK.
Okay.
The Chrysler Crossfire, baby.
Yeah.
Same car, right? I mean, it was based on the same platform.
Well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I don't like the way those look as much, honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And I don't know, it kind of looks like a dog pooping.
Well,
The Chrysler Crossfire, that's kind of what it looks like.
That was
to
what
me.
Jeremy Clarkson said. Yeah, you
Yeah.
got that curve in the back if you get the coupe. But what about the convertible?
The convertibles are better, but it's still a soft top, right?
Yeah,
Isn't the
yeah.
Yeah, the Crossfire is still a soft top, whereas the SLK 350, you get the hard top convertible, which I think is a little bit better.
What
yeah,
about?
and it has more of a presence going down the road. The SLK does, whereas the Chrysler Crossfire going down the road, you know, it looks like a Chrysler. You know.
What about the SRT model?
The SRT is cool, but you can't get those in a manual. Just like
Right.
the AMG version of the SLK, they never came in a manual. Although they're great. I mean, you know, the AMG has the V8 with 355 horsepower, which is fantastic, but you can't row your own.
So you're big in the row your own boat now.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now, what about in a car like this though? It's got a good engine, but it's not a great engine.
Okay.
It's, you know, it's just a pretty standard V6. It's not going to handle that well. I mean, it's still soft, relatively soft. It's not
Sure.
a Miata. So what about someone that's like, do you really need a manual in this? This is like more of a cruiser.
I
What
mean,
would
if
you
you're
say to that?
I mean, if you're buying a Lincoln Town car, you don't need a manual transmission.
Oh wow, we're bringing in the
But
town car.
if you're buying a convertible, you're probably going to have a little bit of, unless you're buying like a 50s convertible, you're going to have some sporting intentions going on with it. And it's just going to be more enjoyable to row your own.
So always in every car would you get the manual over the auto?
Not in every car.
Okay, so what's the case where you wouldn't get the manual over an auto?
Well, like I said, I mean, if you're getting like a soft, comfy cruiser, like I recently bought an Audi A4 that I thought would be great in a manual. It's got a 6-speed manual on it, and it's kind of numb and vague and boring, honestly. You might as well. It's just such a soft car that you might as well just get the automatic. So when you get a car that like the manual transmission isn't rewarding and it's not engaging to drive with, I think if you're going to own that car, it's clearly just a cruise down the road and have no sporting intentions car, then just get the automatic.
Okay, interesting. What's going on with that Audi, by the way? You still have that thing?
Yeah, it's like an onion. We're peeling layers of repairs that need to be done to it. It started where we couldn't get the hood open. Well, we got that fixed.
You have to break the grill?
No, thankfully. We found out that actually on the passenger side of the vehicle, they had an additional hood latch that was hidden underneath all of the plastic inside.
What?
Yeah, and so my mechanic did the research to find out that if he pulls all these plastic panels off and like part of the glove box out,
You can get
he
to
found
the cable?
this little extra cable that he pulled that opened the hood.
Wow.
And we replaced the cable that was broken, so now you can pull it normally instead
Nice.
of having to tear it apart. And then we also found that it had a coolant leak due to just a bad gasket, not like a head gas or anything, just like a regular O-ring that was bad. And the oil cooler was leaking profusely, so he just put that in today, actually.
Nice.
Just put in a new oil cooler, but yeah, now the fuel gauge isn't working as well. So yeah, it's just lots and lots of repairs going on with that thing.
You know what's interesting is Brendan has the worst luck in history with Audis.
I do.
You have never owned an Audi that has not given you a tremendous number of problems.
Yeah, but I like them. They make really good looking cars. They're comfortable seats. You know, they have some good sounding engines. They're just not built well.
Well,
unfortunately.
I mean,
at least the ones that I've owned.
Yeah,
haven't
the
been.
older stuff.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at like the older stuff, which is more our budget, right? You had
Right.
Audi, Mercedes, and BMW from the early 2000s. I never really liked the Audis from the early 2000s, except for the
Yeah.
TT, which was awesome. But the like your generation that you're looking at through like 2010, R8 was cool. I'll give you that.
Yes.
Gated manual R8 was cool. But like the S cars, even the RS cars, I'd be like, just get an M3 or get an AMG. But big community around them.
Yeah, I mean,
really big community.
Either way, you'd be well served to have a fun car, but neither of them are really going to be that reliable, in all honesty, of that generation from BMW to Audi.
So we just published a video over at TFL Classics where we purchased a Trans Am off of TFL Bids.
Yeah.
A 95 Comp TA Trans Am. We were in there bidding with all of you guys. And if you want to list your car, check out tflbids.com. Had some really cool submissions, so be sure to check them out. And we'd love to get some more from you guys. We'll promote them on the videos. But Brendan road tripped with our marketing guy, Grant, all the way across country in this Trans Am. We've got a video out. How was your trip?
Yeah, it was exhausting, quite frankly. Yeah, I mean, we drove almost 2,000 miles in 2 days. And that car is very loud. It's not very comfortable. And we actually just took it over to Toby's. That video either may be out or may be coming out, depending on when this podcast goes live. And it left its markings on me. It's dripping oil as we were standing underneath the car.
It does have a couple oil leaks.
Yeah, a couple of oil leaks and a few other issues going on that Toby was nice enough to point out to us.
Definitely
in the
needs
video.
tires, but overall, body's very clean.
Yeah.
Interior's quite nice. Engine strong, clutch is strong. Turns out the brakes are good. Needs some suspension work because it's kind of like having Whoopi on a waterbed. It just go flying around everywhere, I would imagine, not from experience. But
Yeah.
Cool car, so appreciate Brendan making that long drive.
Well,
Did you
thanks.
have your Portillos?
I did. Yeah, we got Portillos, we got some Kansas City barbecue, and even had some pit beef, which I had never heard of until the owner recommended, or the previous owner of the Trans Am recommended it to us.
What is pit beef?
It's basically slow smoked beef that is like smoked outside all day, and they throw it on a sandwich with some like horseradish sauce, and it was pretty good.
Any
actually.
good? Really?
Yeah, I would recommend it if you're out in the Baltimore area. Get yourself some pit beef.
Wow. Good choice. All right, let's get back to the list, Brendan. So number 5 on the list, the Mazda Miata But we're talking about the NC generation from '06 through 2015. This is the black sheep of the Miata lineup because it was the biggest, the heaviest, and actually one of the best, in my opinion, talking about the NC.
Yeah, so we've talked about the other generations of Miata, but I don't think we've talked about the NC before. This was made from 2006 to 2015, and it was actually the first generation of Miata to feature a retractable hardtop, which I think is pretty interesting.
That was in the time when everybody, like the SLK we just talked about, like everybody was like, well, you know what we need? Retractable hardtops. And then they realized, well, they're kind of complex and expensive and heavy, so now everything is back to soft tops. But the NC is arguably the most roomy Miata, which is why it's one of my favorites, because it's the most comfortable.
It is. And this was actually the first ground-up redesign of the Miata, because the second generation, although it looked fairly different from the first generation, it did share quite a few components with that first generation. This one was 100% from the ground up, an all new design. And so I think that's really interesting, is the way that they decided to go, the direction they decided to go with it after those first two generations of Miata. And yes, it was a little bit bigger. It was made for our American large rumps in the seats, so it's a little more comfortable. But they also gave it a little more power with a 2-liter 4-cylinder pumping out 170 horsepower.
Yeah, and I have driven a couple of these, both in auto, believe it or not, and manual. And every time I drive them, I love them because they feel like a Miata. I mean, if you are like the kind of person that wants to shave milliseconds off at the track, sure, an NB or an ND would probably be better because it's a little lighter.
Sure.
But if you're a real person who's driving in the canyons and want to have some fun, the NC is great. It's got a little bit more room. I think the design is really cool. I think the design has actually aged super, super well. It's got a pretty good interior. It's got pretty good safety technology, and it's just an all-around good car.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually, I've never driven one of these.
Yeah?
But I do want to. I would assume that they're a little more comfortable. I've driven the first two generation Miatas, and I can fit in them, but not by much.
I've never driven an NA or NB.
Oh, really?
No, I've driven NC and then a lot of the NDs. But this is a great car. It really is a good size, I think, for American roads and American body types. It offers a good amount of tech and a lot of fun for they're still pretty expensive. Like, they haven't quite gotten to like the $5,000 or $6,000 range. For a good one, you're still probably going to be paying $10,000 to $15,000.
Sure.
But very reliable as well. So I think that was a great choice. Now, not to something not as reliable, the E46 BMW, the 3 Series from the early 2000s. And this one, you said, the ZHP. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the ZHP was a performance package that could be added onto the 330-based 3 Series. So if you can't afford an M3, this really is the next best option. So some of you may remember from the earlier BMWs, like the 325 IS, right? This is basically that, the IS version, except they called it the ZHP. So the ZHP from 2003 to 2005 were available on the sedans, and from 2004 to 2006 were available on the coupes and convertibles. And these had sportier camshafts, revised engine tuning, and it increased the horsepower from 225 up to 235 horsepower.
Yeah, and it also has a different final drive ratio and a higher red line, thicker anti-roll bars, and a 0 to 60 in the mid 5-second range.
Yeah, they're pretty potent little cars. And these even had firmer springs and dampers, as well as a larger anti-roll bars. So they could really take the corners quite well. And if you can't afford an M3, which, I know I can't, these ones are still pretty affordable when we're talking, under $15,000 for even a really good one.
So we were talking about this in the car the other day, but my favorite generation of 3 Series, is the E30 from the 80s.
Okay.
Your favorite generation is actually this one.
Yes, the E46.
Why is this your favorite?
Because I think that was the last true 3 Series, like the last true one. Before they started turbocharging things, before they started putting V8s, this was all straight 6-engine cars with just different variations of horsepower and different variations of performance modifications. And although they don't have the best reputation for reliability, they are far more reliable than the next generation.
Oh, yeah.
Where they went into the turbocharging and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Those are super problematic. These ones have a few issues here and there.
They're just normal problematic.
Yeah, just normal BMW problematic. Maybe not quite as reliable as like an E30, but relatively reliable as far as BMWs go. And actually, when they do have a special place in my heart and always will, because when my dad passed away, the last car that he owned was a 2004 BMW 330 Ci that he passed down to me.
Now, that's an interesting story because you were much younger than you are now when he ordered that car.
Oh, yes.
And what's the story behind that?
Yeah, so he was ordering it brand new. He was replacing his 325 IS, and I was trying so hard to convince him to get an M3 in Laguna Seca Blue because that car is gorgeous. It is, in my opinion, one of the best looking BMWs ever made. And he was just like, nope, I drove one. It's too harsh. I didn't like it. And so what did he order? He ordered a 330 Ci, but then he got the sport package that firmed up the suspension and gave it bigger wheels. And so then he complained that that one was too harsh.
Didn't you say, what I think is even more interesting is that the car you ordered was so well optioned,
yes,
it wasn't far off the price of an M3, right?
Yeah, the one that he ordered was like $44,000, and the M3 I was trying to tell him to get was $46,000.
In Laguna Seca
in Laguna
Blue?
Seca Blue. So it was literally only $2,000 more, and he could have had an M3. But yeah, I got my stubbornness from him. So he was stubborn and was like, nope, I'm not getting the M3. I'm getting the 330 Ci with the sport package. And he like special ordered it and shipped it in from Germany and all that. Yeah.
What do you think the price difference now is between that car and a Laguna Blue M3?
Oh my gosh. I'm sure there's at least a $10,000
You think so?
gap, if not more.
Interesting. Yeah, great cars.
Yeah. Oh, if you're saying like as far as in the used market goes.
Yeah, in the used market.
I ended up a few years ago selling my dad's old car for about $14,000.
Yeah.
An equivalent M3 in just as nice condition, especially if it was Laguna Seca Blue, yeah, you'd be talking high 20s.
Wow.
I would say.
Yeah, so
mid
it's a
to
big,
high 20s.
almost double.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I can't blame him. You know, the M3 was, especially that generation, was a pretty firm car.
It was,
you know?
yeah. And this was his daily driver, so.
Yeah, it would be tricky.
Yeah, for sure.
So next up on the list, Brendan, is that I'm ashamed to say this, is a car I know almost zero about. So you're going to have to learn me on this one. This is the Mazdaspeed 6.
Well, as some of you listeners of the podcast may know, I am a big, big fan of Mazdaspeed and the whole 4 cars that they created in their existence.
And also the Nissan Hardbody.
Well, yeah, and the Nissan Hardbody. Always the Nissan Hardbody. Actually, since you missed the last podcast in cases here,
Yeah.
we forgot to mention the Hardbody.
Oh, no, Brendan.
Yes.
Oh, of all those people that watch that podcast.
I know.
They're going home with bad information.
So now the Hardbody will have to live within you because I dropped the ball. So every podcast that you're on, as far as the classics goes, you're going to have to mention the Hardbody. So that way we can keep at least that streak going. But anyways, the Mazdaspeed 6 is, I think, a really great vehicle and probably one of the most interesting vehicles that Mazda has made. So this is back in a time in 2003 when this came out. I'm sorry, this is based on the Mazda 6 that was built from 2003 to 2008. But this was made later on in that lineup. They wanted to kind of compete with, if you remember, like the Subaru Legacy GT, where they had a bigger sedan that was somewhat comfortable but had a turbo and some all-wheel drive. And that is what this was made to compete with. So this came out in 2006, and then they also sold it in 2007. So only a 2-year model, but they put a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder with direct injection and had 274 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque with all-wheel drive. So, I mean, you get the best of both worlds. You can drive this thing year-round in the snow, and you've got a pretty potent little fun car to drive.
That's pretty cool. Now, they don't look that different from a standard Mazda 6, right? Like the visual differences are pretty slight.
Yeah, it has a little bit of a hood bulge, and it has some additional wheels, and then out back, it's got this dual exhaust. So if you see that dual exhaust and you see the hood bulge, you know you're looking at a Mazdaspeed, but the vast majority of people wouldn't necessarily be able to discern this from a regular Mazda 6 going down the road.
Quick car, though. I mean, 6.1 to 60 in 2003.
Yeah.
Pretty serious performance numbers.
Yeah, 14.3 quarter mile, too.
I mean, 274, like the 05 Mustang GT was maybe pushing 300. So
Right.
you're not far off the Mustang numbers with all-wheel drive.
Exactly. Yeah, so you have some all-weather type of performance. And this had some handling things going on too. So it was 50% more torsionally rigid than the standard Mazda 6. It also had a limited slip differential for the rear wheels that was borrowed from the Mazda RX-8.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. I
Pretty
think it's
cool.
a pretty cool machine.
Yeah, I agree. So, speaking of last week's podcast, I thought we'd read some comments.
Sure.
And if you want your comment to be read for sure, send us a note on Patreon, patreon.com/TFLcar. You guys are the real MVP. You make this possible. Big thank you to all of you out there supporting us because we couldn't do it without you. But let's talk about some of the YouTube comments this week. So, Justin says the Jeep Liberty is super underrated in my opinion. It has all the basic equipment one would expect for an off-road vehicle, but for a much lower price.
Yeah. I mean, my mom had a first-gen Liberty, and that thing gave her nothing but problems.
Did she have a new?
Yeah. Well, she bought it when it was like 1 year old, so almost new. And yeah, she put like 100,000 miles on it in her ownership, and she had to replace the engine and pretty much every component under the hood had to be replaced at least once in her ownership. And so that's kind of soured me a little bit on those first-gen Liberties. I mean, yeah, I get if you got the Renegade with a manual transmission, those are pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I'm not sold on the reliability of them personally.
JCWW Racing 905 says cool videos always. I also really like the oddballs like the Vehicross and the X90. Oh, good choice with the X90.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this is the podcast that Case and I did where we talked about some of the off-roaders that you guys had forgotten about. And I had said in there that my number one was the Suzuki X90, and it's currently the number one vehicle that I want.
The
more
X90?
than anything. Yes, that weird, odd, ugly duckling of a vehicle where they
The little
decided
blob?
where they decided to make a T-top off-roader.
Yes. And then let's read a couple more here. Nice podcast. I like this duo. Case is always great. Daniel, this is my favorite comment of this video. I rolled over in my buddy's Bronco 2 in the late 90s in high school, as I'm sure many others did.
Yeah.
That's what they were best known for, rolling over.
Oh, yes.
My little brother's PlayStation 1 flew out the sunroof onto a grass embankment and still works today.
Wow, that's
The
awesome.
quality of the PlayStation 1.
Do you think the newest PlayStation would go through that and still work afterwards? I'm not so sure.
That one was an absolute tank.
Yeah.
All right. So, guys, thank you for watching. Big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We're going to take a quick ad break here, and we'll be right back. And we're back. Thank you for listening to that ad. Hopefully, the insertion has treated you well because we have no control over what we just played. Believe it or not, the ads kind of just, they're whatever they are.
They're just shoved in there, and then we just find out about it later.
And then we make 3 pennies off of it. So
Yeah.
thank you for the 3 pennies. A big thank you for all of you that kept listening through that ad. And I was going to ask you an interesting question, and I have just remembered it again.
Okay.
What car did you race this morning on Gran Turismo?
Oh, I raced a 2007 Suzuki Swift, and I did it on the Nürburgring.
Oh, my God. Must have been a long morning, Brendan.
Yeah, it's a long way around the Nürburgring. I did a whole 2 laps
So
around the
Brendan
Nürburgring.
wakes up every morning and plays 30 minutes of Gran Turismo every single morning. They should be a sponsor.
Please, yeah.
All the free advertising we're giving Gran
Right?
Turismo. Why the Suzuki Swift this morning?
It's a car I hadn't driven yet in the game, and I had just bought it. It was super cheap. It was like only 15,000 credits.
And you like it?
Yeah, it was pretty fun. It was only like 123 horsepower, but I raced it against a bunch of other small hatchbacks like the Polo GTI, and, some other things that we didn't get here in the States.
Did you win?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Well, I was playing against the computer on the normal mode, not even the expert mode, so of course I won.
I like that little Suzuki. It was in the previous Gran Turismos too. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty fun. You can make it pretty fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they even have, in real life, they have a Suzuki Swift Racing League, believe it or not. But we
It'd be
never
cool if
got
we-
that car in the States.
I know, it'd be cool if we did get those. I
Yeah.
wouldn't mind driving one of those someday.
Is the Suzuki X90 really at the top of your list?
It's at the top of my bucket list of cars to own right now.
There you go. You heard it here first, folks. If you know
Yeah.
an X90, be sure to send it Brendan's way. Would you sell the Audi, your pride and joy Audi, for an X90?
In a heartbeat. Yes, please. Take my Audi.
What about the Baja Bug?
Ooh, that might be tougher.
Oh, there you go.
There
you go.
I don't know.
Gotta get a clutch
If
of
we're
that
doing
Baja
a trade,
Bug.
you might have to throw some cash on top to make it worth my while, but maybe.
So, Brendan, number 2 on the list of fun and relatively affordable, relatively on this one because these have held their value like crazy, the 04 through 06 Pontiac GTO.
Yeah, so these were brought in. Actually, this was an American muscle car that was imported to us from Australia because Australia had been building them as the Holden Monaro.
Yeah. First GTO to come to the States in 30 years, by the way, and boy, did it ever. So it launched with the LS1 V8 with 350 horsepower, same as a Corvette, 0 to 60 in the low 5-second range, quarter mile in the high 13s, and we're talking like early 2000s. This thing blew out of the market, blew people's minds, and great car.
Yeah, well, the thing that I think is interesting is that it actually took so there were some journalists that went over to Australia and drove the Holden Monaro and then wrote a piece onto why they think this car is great and why they should sell it in the States.
Okay.
And Bob Lutz read that article and then pitched all the GM executives saying, I think we need to bring this stateside. So they originally intended to sell this thing for like $25,000.
Okay.
So they were thinking, Pontiac Trans Am or Chevy Camaro kind of replacement, right?
Sure, yeah.
Which they didn't really have on offer at the time.
Yeah.
That they brought this thing over, and they thought it would be a really good seller at $25,000. But in the time that it took them to actually import it to the U.S., Australia's dollar inflated so much compared to the U.S. dollar that by the time it came here, it was not $25,000. It was $34,000.
Ugh.
And because of that,
Too
it
expensive.
sold poorly.
Yeah. Too expensive. And now they're still expensive. There's a really passionate community around these. Oftentimes I see it for like the mid $20,000 range for a car from 05, 06, especially the later ones. Really desirable. You could get it with the auto, but you probably shouldn't. You should get it with the 6-speed manual.
Yep.
And then the later ones at a 6-liter LS2, right?
Yeah, and that thing bumped it up to 400 horsepower, and it dropped that 0 to 60 time below 5 seconds and did the quarter mile in the low 13s.
Pretty impressive performer. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if you can find one nowadays, very sought after. Once again, another car with an interior that's not much inspired. This is, I think, like a press pick, and already the leather's looking like my grandparents without clothes on.
Jeez.
All wrinkly and just not something you want to sit in.
Yeah, I mean, GM was back then really not known for their interior build quality, but
What about the Pontiac G8? Did you consider that one?
yeah, I mean, isn't that another Australian imported
Yeah, it is.
Pontiac?
Yeah,
Yeah,
also
those are
Holden.
also super valuable.
And the
these
Chevy
days.
SS, which was also
Yep.
another Holden
A
imported.
bunch of great cars that just did not sell well,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I think they were too expensive, but the G8 is actually a super cool car.
I agree.
Yeah, I would love to get a hold of one of those one day. And also, another car I'd love to own, 300C SRT8.
Like the early ones?
09, 010.
Oh, yeah.
010.
Those are
09, 2010.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, that was like the coolest car. 400 horsepower, 6.1 liter Hemi. Ace.
Yeah.
That thing was
those
rad.
if I were to get one of those, though, I would probably go for like the Magnum.
Yeah, but
the
those are
Dodge Magnum
expensive. Those are hard to
SRT8.
get.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are cool, though. And number 1 on our list, Brendan, the MR2, the 3rd generation.
Yeah.
Didn't we just talk about this car? I feel like we just talked about this car.
We definitely talked about the first generation.
We were talking about the Celica,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
In the
we
last
did. We
one.
did. Yeah, we talked about the Celica GTS. So this was in that same generation where the last gen Celica, this was also the last generation of the MR2. These came out in 2000 and sold all the way through 2007. And this was actually marketed as the MR2 Spyder
Yeah.
because they only came as a convertible, even though the previous 2 generation MR2s weren't even offered in convertible version. This one exclusively came as a drop top.
Now, I think folks were a little bit let down when this debuted because the first gen, supercharged. Second gen could be had with the turbocharger. Third gen, naturally aspirated only, convertible only, and people expected this to be like a screaming performer. And it was a really good performer, but it was kind of overshadowed by the previous generations.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they're good value. Not a lot of power, right?
Yeah, only about 138 horsepower out of the 1.8 liter four-cylinder. So it's certainly not a screamer by any means. But if you're talking about comparing this to like a Miata, this has the engine sitting behind you. So it's a little bit better balanced situation. I think these might even be slightly shorter than some of like the NC Miatas of the same type of year. And they only weighed 2,200 pounds. So they were surprisingly quick for how little power they had.
Now, I autocross sometimes, and there's a person that shows up, a gal that shows up in an MR2 with sticky tires of this generation, and she just roasts me.
Really?
I mean, bone stock, 138 horsepower. I've got like 210, and she's just whoosh. I mean, the thing is so fast on an autocross. It really is a great handling machine.
Nice.
So, Brendan, of all the cars on the list, we got everything from Saturns to Mazdas to Pontiacs to BMWs. Which one is your go-to recommendation for the best affordable classic from the early 2000s?
It's got to be the one that I like the way it looks the best.
And that's the Suzuki X90.
Yeah, well, yeah, Suzuki X90. But if I have to stick to this specific list, I'm going to go with the Saturn Sky Redline.
Okay.
I think it's gorgeous, a timeless design that I think died too soon, but is just a really cool car. And they are starting to go up in value a little bit. People are starting to realize just how cool of a vehicle
Especially
those
the red
are.
line, yeah.
Yeah, so if you want one, now is the time to get it.
Now, I like that car a lot, but I would pitch to you my favorite car on the list, especially for how affordable they are, the new Edge Mustang. Early 2000s Mustang. I loved our SN95. Really fell in love with that car. Even with 215 horsepower, it was just such a great car to row through the gears, let that exhaust sing, and I think the new Edge, even better, a little bit cooler looking, a little bit faster. That's going to be the one for me, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going for a Terminator, those things are super valuable.
That's pretty big money now, yeah.
Yeah, but if you just get a GT, you can definitely get a nice GT for less than 10 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're definitely a good affordable option.
Speaking of affordable fun, what's going on with the Pontiac Vibe?
It's still sitting in my backyard. I haven't had my mechanic work on it yet because the Audi is holding him up. As soon as the Audi is done, the Pontiac Vibe is going to go up to him and get a few things done.
Peeling back the onion layers on the Vibe.
Yeah, that Audi it's literally just like a clog in the arteries that's stopping everything from moving forward. Because I also bought a Honda Del Sol.
I didn't know this.
Yes,
no way.
I just bought and it's a Del Sol, and I didn't even know this until after I bought it, and I was driving it home. I looked at the back, and it said SI.
No.
On the back, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's an SI. I didn't even realize I just bought a Del Sol SI.
At auction?
At auction.
Yesterday?
When you were gone last week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is it fun?
Yes. It's pretty fun.
Is it clean?
No. It's rough. It's rough. It needs some love. It's got a lot of clear coat peel, and it's got a big old Folgers-sized fart can out the back. And
we got to do a video.
Yeah.
Immediately. Is it a real SI, or do you think someone just badged it?
I think it's a real SI.
When you pop the hood, does it say VTEC on the hood?
Yes.
On the engine?
Yeah.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Is it fast?
It's quick. It sounds faster than it is.
Is it pretty loud?
Yeah. It's pretty drony because of that exhaust that they put on
What year is it?
It's a 93. So it's the first year of the Del Sol.
Wow.
So
drive pretty well?
Yeah, it actually drives pretty well. The only thing that concerns me with it is that the coolant temperature gauge doesn't work.
Oh, it's okay. It's cold all the time.
Yeah, so I'm worried that I'm driving around like an overheating car.
Does it smell hot when you get out of it?
No.
Oh, okay.
But it makes me worry.
It's a Honda.
Yeah,
pretty
that's
reliable.
true.
We got to do something with that on the channel. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, guys, let us know what you think about Brendan's new purchase and the top 10 cars on our list. Are we missing any? Are we stupid for some? Let me know what you think of my mayonnaise habit, which I'm sure is going to get all the comments.
Or breakfast deviled eggs.
Or breakfast deviled eggs. Brendan's patenting that. Don't take his idea. As always, has been Tommy.
And Brendan. And, of course, the Nissan Hardbody.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, my God. I'm going to go drive almost a Nissan Hardbody on Monday.
What is it? What do you mean? What is almost a Nissan hard
In
body?
1983, Nissan did a press trip where they drove from Las Vegas to California on the Mojave Road
Okay.
in Nissan trucks in the 80s, and we're recreating it in 2023 trucks
Where is this at?
in Las Vegas.
And why wasn't I invited?
Because it was not technically a hard body. It's pre-hard body.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go. It's gonna be very cold, I think. It's not gonna be very glamorous, but it will be a good adventure. And we are driving in the footsteps of the hard body.
Okay.
Just being on the same road where a hard body once has been is an honor in itself.
Absolutely.
All
We
right.
all need to go buy a hard body.
Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care, guys.